Welcome to Books at Berklee. Today I have with me Alex Ludwig and Simone Pilon, and we're going to be talking about the book that they edited called Woodstock, Then and Now, a 50th Anniversary Celebration. Alex Ludwig is the interim assistant chair of the Liberal Arts and Sciences Department. He teaches classes in music history and, along with Simone Pilon, co-hosted the Woodstock 50 Symposium in 2019 that forms the basis of this book. Simone Pilon is Dean of Academic Affairs for Berklee's campus in Valencia, Spain. Prior to joining the Valencia campus, she was chair of the Liberal Arts Department in Boston, where she worked with Alex and the Liberal Arts team on organizing a celebration for the 50th anniversary of Woodstock. Thank you for joining us at Books at Berklee.
Thanks for having us.
I guess my first question for you today was that the book captures transcripts, basically, of events that were held in Boston, the symposium, in 2019 in honor of this 50th anniversary of the Woodstock Festival of 1969. Why did you feel a printed version of that event was helpful?
Well, I'll take this first question, and again, thank you for having us. This symposium was really the product of about 2 years of work. Simone and myself and Mike Mason, who was the assistant chair at the time, we've really been working on this symposium for quite a while, and the book felt like a sort of a natural next step. You know, we had all of these folks here from Woodstock. These were the original people on the ground who made it happen. They were the official photographer, the MC, the producers. They were all here. And they were all here for the first time since Woodstock, the first time they'd all been together. And so it was really Simone's idea to take this next step and get these transcripts out in the world, because we didn't know at the time, but Michael Lang, who was really the public face of Woodstock, he has since passed away. He passed away this past January. And ironically, he was the youngest of all of the folks that were here. And we just thought that having this transcript out in the world was really the one of the last things that existed for Woodstock. We could put our final stamp on Woodstock as a sort of public-facing project.
That makes a lot of sense. I was wondering if you could tell our listeners a little more detail about the event itself that was held at Berklee, and maybe something about that event that was really special to you.
Well, I can start with the detail, and I'll maybe share something special for me, and then if Alex wants to jump in, of course, he's welcome to. So essentially, we planned a week-long festival. We called it Woodstock Week. And during the week, so the weekdays, we had a variety of events for students, for faculty, for members of the Berklee community. So we showed the Woodstock documentary. We had a showing. We sort of went with the period also. And we had a showing of the film Easy Rider with a conversation with a faculty member from film scoring. We had a trivia contest, a Woodstock trivia contest, and we had some performances on the patio outside of 7 Haviland. So we had all these events during the week to try to build excitement for the weekend. The weekend was the actual symposium. And so it was an interesting combination of an academic symposium, so an academic conference, but with these more sort of popular culture conversations. So we had different people who came in. I believe there were 13 presenters who presented research on Woodstock or topics relating to Woodstock. And these were people that were local to Boston, as well as some people that were international. So we had them come, and in between their talks, we had these different sessions with our Woodstock luminaries. That's what we called them, the different people who were there at Woodstock, who were the founding people. And we interspersed those conversations with these more traditional conference papers. We also had some performances by student ensembles. And so that was sort of the structure of it. And that weekend we had one session that we called Woodstock Then, so looking at Woodstock in 1969, so 50 years before. And what was great was that we had that moderated by former Berklee staff and faculty member Bob Mulvey, who was at Woodstock himself. And then we had a session called Woodstock Now, so looking at Woodstock 50 years later. And then we had a session that was specifically with Gerardo Velez, who was Jimi Hendrix's drummer and roommate. And so we had a session there specifically with him. And those 3 sessions, as well as one that happened during the week, are what make up the book. For me, what I think was incredibly special, and Alex alluded to it before, but it really was the first time that these people got together in 50 years. And these people were, Michael Lang, one of the founders of Woodstock, Henry Diltz and Elliot Landy, the photographers for Woodstock, Chip Monk, who was the lighting designer, but also who ended up being the MC, Bill Hanley, who did the sound, Rona Elliott, who was involved in public relations, and Gerardo Velez, who played with Jimi Hendrix. And it was the first time all of them had come together. And we had a dinner with most of them there. And it was just, before things happened, we were just sitting there going, this is history in the making. These people coming together again was pretty exceptional. And so to me, that was what was really special about it. I don't know, Alex, if you want to add something else that was special for you.
Sure, and it's really more of a follow-up. It was really seeing those luminaries interacting with each other, and it really gave us an insight into what they were like 50 years ago, because the instant that Chip Monk got on stage, he's very technical minded, and he was interested in how the microphones were working and how the actual production was happening, which was his background. And Rona Elliott is very much, she's a journalist, and so she would often take over asking questions and follow up other questions. And it felt like all of those luminaries just sort of fell right back into their old habits, and to see them up on stage interacting was really fantastic.
And I love that Alex says that Chip was fascinated by everything technical, including the microphones, because, and we might get, I'll get into this in a little bit, but he essentially didn't always use his microphone. And so he was fascinated by it, but didn't always use it.
It's sort of ironic there. Yeah, one of the things, features of the book was that Rona Elliott, at the back of the book, you have a section where Rona Elliott does these sort of profiles of the luminaries. And how did that come about that she wrote that for the book?
Well, essentially, Rona was really involved with us and helping us put together the book. She was extremely excited by the process and really helped us answer questions. There were some things in the book, we have footnotes and we have what we called sidebars, so with some additional historical and cultural information. But we had footnotes throughout that explained things and that gave more information. And sometimes we had troubles finding the information we needed, and Rona helped connect us with the right people. She helped us with some of that research. She invited us to go to her home in LA, where we were able to go through her archives of Woodstock and see everything she had. So she was really involved in this process. And honestly, I'm not sure the book would have happened without Rona. So we're really thankful for everything she did. So we wanted Rona to have a voice in the book and for her voice to be heard. And we thought, this would be very unique biographies, because they aren't, just someone sitting there on the internet or in books doing research. Rona actually sat down with each person and wrote their biography with them. And so it made for very unique biographies. And we were really happy to have those and to be able to include them in the book.
Yeah, I felt that they were a very special feature of the book. And another special feature of the book that I thought was really, really helpful, I think, to young people who would be reading about this, whether those sidebars, those historical events being explained, and some background about people and topics that are mentioned in the transcripts. How did you choose which things to tell? I mean, there's so many historical features that are mentioned in the book, and there's so much background in the 60s that maybe a person my age might have, just sort of know because we lived through it. But how did you choose what kind of topics to really feature in that?
Well, I'm a music historian by training, so I felt really strongly that we really needed to provide this context. I really wanted anyone to be able to pick up the book and have these sort of reference points as they're reading the text, because as you said, for these Woodstock, that generation, these were really pivotal moments. So we have a sidebar on the Chicago Democratic National Convention in 1968, and this was just a landmark moment for the counterculture. And Woodstock is taking place less than a year after that, right? So this would have been an incredibly powerful moment for all of those folks who were there on stage and who were at the festival. And so I really wanted to make sure that we can sort of underscore those connections. There's another sidebar on violence that happened that year and around Woodstock at other festivals. And it's really sort of fascinating to look at how these other festivals did their security, and how Woodstock was a massive festival and it had very little violence. There was none at all compared to places like Denver or the infamous Altamont festival that took place later that year, where actual deaths occurred right near stage because of the security. So all of those things colored our luminaries' perception of Woodstock. And I really wanted to make sure that our readers, no matter what age they're from, no matter what generation they're from, could have some of that sort of understanding and context.
It was great. I thought that was a really helpful feature. And also that, even for anybody of any age, seeing it from a historical perspective, rather than just sort of whatever your memories might be or might not be. I wanted to follow up with that a little bit about if you could speak to the editorial process that you went through in making the book, because I know that while these are generally transcripts, it's almost like a script of a play or a film, in that there's notation about someone interjected or movement or things like that. Can you talk a little bit about that, which really made reading the book come alive in a very real way?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And actually, I love that you said that, because that was exactly our intention, was that we took those concepts from sort of a playwriting tradition. So we had video of all these events. Berklee's great about having video of events that happen in the main halls. And we had all this video, but we thought, who's going to actually have access to this and know this exists? And this is where we started to think about, this needs to be immortalized. This event was too important to not immortalize it. So what we did was we actually had our wonderful liberal arts work study students, who are all thanked in the book, who did a first round at transcribing, of typing out all of those interviews. And then Alex and I went through them and, corrected them, cleaned them up. One of our challenges, I mentioned that Chipmunk often didn't use his mic. And so people would keep saying to him, use your mic, Chip, use your mic, Chip. Well, the challenge was we missed a lot of what Chip said, because it wasn't recorded on the video. Or sometimes we just didn't understand it well enough. So we had to make some decisions like that. So we did cut some parts, or maybe clean some things up, just to make it a little bit more readable. Again, these were people speaking, it was very casual. And so we wanted to make it a little bit more readable. So we did do a little bit of editing in that sense. And we did eliminate anything that wasn't clear, or that we couldn't really definitely say this is what the person was saying. And then we did try to keep that conversational nature by using words like interjecting, by including, even if it was just a one word, just to show that it was a conversation. So it took us quite a while to get to that finished product, but we really wanted to capture that conversation, and at the same time make it maybe a little bit more readable than it was had it been a word for word translation of everything. Rather than having blanks of we're not sure what this said, we would just leave that out of the text. We added an introduction to it, again, to explain a little bit the event, as well as some of that cultural information again. So we added that, and then of course the sidebars and footnotes and Rona's biographies. I'd also add, it has amazing pictures, and so we can talk about that later in this interview.
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about the pictures. I just wanted to mention to you that I'm requesting that all of these sessions be digitized
Mm.
and placed in the Remix archive at the library, where Berkeley community would be able to hear that or see
Great.
the videos.
Great.
And that'll hopefully be coming up and maybe attached at in some way, or a link on a library guide. So
Wonderful.
that would be great.
Great.
Yeah, well, let's talk about those photographs. That's a major feature of the book, and of course, there were more photographs presumably during the event, background slides and so on. Tell us a little bit about those photographs, and we have the famous photographer who was at Woodstock
Mhm.
taking those photos. I believe is the photographer for almost all the photos in the book.
That's correct. We
That's right.
had we had two photographers at the event. We had Henry Diltz, who was the official photographer for Woodstock, as well as Elliot Landy, who actually lived in Woodstock and was invited by Michael Lang to take part in the event. What was amazing was during the event, pictures actually were our narrative. So there was a series of pictures that were being shown in the background, both of Henry's as well as Elliot's, that once in a while the speakers would stop and look at and they would comment on. And so we reference those pictures in the book, and when possible, we actually include them. So the book includes about 30 pictures, most of them by Henry Diltz, and a big thank you to Henry Diltz for providing those to us at no cost. So we really appreciate that.
Wonderful.
And so we have these amazing pictures, you know, Jimi Hendrix, of, you know, Tim Hardin, you know, of John Sebastian. We have all these amazing pictures that we have in black and white there, except for the back cover photo, which is a color photo by Jimi Hendrix. We also have a cover photo that's by Elliot Landy, and it's of Joe Cocker. It's an amazing cover photo. And again, we want to thank Elliot for having given us that photo. And then we also have a photo by Bob Gruen. And Alex, I don't know if you want to share a bit about who Bob Gruen is, because we haven't talked about Bob yet.
Well, I wanted to say just that having these photographs, and Simone, you sort of alluded to that, is really sort of fantastic to rekindle our luminaries. They would turn around and look at these photos and they would say, oh, I really remember where I was when I took that photo. And it really helped ground their discussions, because we were able to sort of guide the conversation, but it really helped bring them back to where they were. So we had most of the photos are Henry Diltz, as Simone mentioned. There were a few other photographs that were sort of iconic photographs associated with Woodstock. And again, Rona, she is sort of the keeper of the flame when it comes to Woodstock. And she was able to pull in all these people. And she has this photograph, and it's in the book, of these dark clouds coming over. And, you know, one of the great stories of Woodstock is the rain and the mud and everyone getting together, you know, getting through this moment. And so I absolutely loved this photograph. And she says, oh, you have to talk to this person. And so the photograph was actually by a student named Dan Garson. And he was a teenager. He was 18 or 17. And he was there on assignment from his high school. He had a press pass from his high school to take pictures.
Right.
He has since passed away, and there's I forget the person who's in charge of his estate, but they essentially gave us the rights to publish these photographs in exchange for telling the story of Dan Garson. So he is another one of those sidebars in the book. So most of the photos are Henry Diltz. The cover is Elliot Landy, but there's also a few others by Dan Garson that are also in the book. So it's a nice sort of a scope of photographs.
Yeah, the photographs are great. And also I might mention there was a picture, a couple of pictures of the grounds and architectural drawings, kind of the layout, so you could get a sense of that. And being, you know, historians will probably love that feature, and also people who are you know, thinking about how this space was developed to become a site for a concert.
I don't see those site plans are really not out there in the world that much. So we were really happy to get those included in the book. they're a little hard to see in the final printed product, but it's nice to have them. And they're a wonderful sort of artifact from that same time period.
No, that's great. And I think that's exactly it. And I was going to say, before I said Bob Gruen, I meant Dan Garson, but I should mention Bob Gruen, because on the back cover, as I mentioned, we have one of Henry Diltz's photos, but we also have 3 quotes supporting the book. One from the rock photographer Bob Gruen, one from actress Jamie Lee Curtis, and we have a third one from Graham Nash. So we're really excited that they were willing to lend their words of support of our book.
That was really great. And I would like to talk a little bit, if you could, since you were both present at the events themselves, is one of the major features of these discussions that are transcribed in the book seems to be kind of, as you mentioned earlier, a cross between an academic conference and, popular culture. It also seemed to be kind of this crossing between historical events and maybe, although I don't know where those lines are blurred, between a nostalgia, issues, how people are just talking and, memory. And actually, I think as some of the transcript people were correcting other people's memories and things like that. In what way do you feel that this accounting or recounting would show that kind of feature of how, 50 years later, how people are remembering things differently than maybe other people do, and so on?
Well, as Simone mentioned, that we did have these 2 different roundtables, and they are essentially represented in the book as 2 different chapters: Woodstock then and Woodstock now. And it was very intentional that we wanted to both interrogate what these folks were doing on the ground in 1969. But then we also wanted to sort of think about how Woodstock has evolved and changed in the 50 years since. So we asked questions about, the myths that were associated with Woodstock, and we tried to sort of not debunk these myths, but to sort of investigate and see what really happened. And there were a few deaths that happened. Mostly were accidental. None were really attributed to drugs and drug overdoses. We did have a sidebar about a medical report that was sort of the official word on what happened at Woodstock in terms of medical issues. And the biggest problem by far was incidents with feet, people walking around barefoot for the weekend. That was the biggest problem. So there was a story about babies being born and things like that. And we could not really find actual hard facts and evidence for this. So it's nice to have sort of those sidebars that go down those rabbit holes just a little bit.
One of the features of the book that was very interesting to me was because I really didn't know the founding, how this Woodstock event happened, and Michael Lang was so instrumental in making this event happen, was the technical aspects that people talked about, how they put it together, how you create such a large event, all the things that went wrong before their planning, and how they had to hustle to do things at the last minute. All those kind of aspects that people who are pursuing kind of careers and festivals and concert management and so on, people in concert production at Berklee today, students that do that, I thought that might have a purpose, a dual purpose. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit how that history of how they did it then, the background, and how this all came about fits into this is relevant for students today.
Well, I would just sort of remind everyone that this book was the outgrowth of a symposium here at Berklee, and we really wanted to pitch this for Berklee students. And so we know that not all Berklee students are going to be out and being performers. Some of them are going to work in the production side and sort of backstage areas. And so I was hoping that those luminaries could speak to that as well, because we did have Gerardo Velez, a performer, but most of the other luminaries were these sort of backstage folks. And so I was hopeful that it wasn't too detailed and too in the weeds, but that it would inspire our current Berklee students that, you know, they too can go out and do this. So almost all of those luminaries were in their 20s when they put on Woodstock. I mean, Michael Lang was the youngest and he was only 22, I think, right? So Rona and Chip and Henry were in their mid 20s. So they're not that much older than our current Berklee students right now. So I hope that wasn't sort of lost on our audience members. Not sure if that answers your question or not, Judy.
No, I think it does. That was a sense that I had from reading it, that it really seemed to appeal to, you know, that sort of technical aspect that people today studying this would find interesting. Another, you mentioned the feature in the book where you had Woodstock then, and then Woodstock today, and how Woodstock is kind of viewed. One of the audience questions that was in the transcription was, when Woodstock first happened, it was largely a counterculture movement, but today it's rooted in nostalgia and mainstream culture. That's a paraphrase. Do you think this event, the Berklee event that's transcribed in this book, will change the narrative about Woodstock in the future?
I'm happy to jump in on this. You know, I think we had both of those pieces represented there. I think they talked a lot about the counterculture movement. And so I think for people who, especially those, our students or other people who might not be particularly familiar with it, there was definitely a focus on that. So I think there was a reminder of what that meant. You know, there was a constant comment, it came up by several of them and multiple times about, at the time, people thought that music should be free and that this was part of the counterculture. And so that piece kept coming up. And today, when we talk about counterculture, I don't think that's something that really occurs to us. So I think on the one hand, it helped us connect with that counterculture and better understand where it came out of. And at the same time, you know, there was a bit of a focus on, there was definitely a nostalgic aspect to it, most definitely. But I think also that mainstream culture with talking about what happened with, you know, Woodstock 94, Woodstock 99. And then at the time, there was a plan for Woodstock, you know, the 50th anniversary of Woodstock concert, which was more mainstream. You know, those were not coming out of the counterculture to that same extent. So will it change the narrative? That I don't know, but I think that it will amplify it in the sense that I think it helps connect those two pieces together. And I think to some extent that they've been disconnected. So that would be my feeling on it. I don't know, Alex, if you have some other thoughts.
No, yeah, I would agree. And yeah, no, that's good.
Thank you. We mentioned about the different kinds of biographical sketches and so on. And one of the great things that I liked about the book was that special event with Rado Velez. And he was the drummer with Jimi Hendrix in the now iconic arrangement of the Star Spangled Banner, I guess. We could say it's iconic. He said, Velez says in his interview, music is a kind of vehicle. We gravitate to certain music because that's the kind of music that makes us feel wonderful. And that's what we tried to do. Could you feel that you could elaborate on this idea and how this book engages with it?
So one of my favorite parts of this book is that last chapter. It's an entire chapter devoted to a one-on-one interview with Gerardo Velez. So he pops up in an earlier chapter. He literally arrived in the middle of one of the roundtable discussions, and he just jumped up on stage and joined the other luminaries. But the next day, so do I have that right? So Sunday morning was Jimi Hendrix Day. And so we had the Jimi Hendrix ensemble from Berklee. They played and he jammed with the ensemble. And then we had a one-on-one interview with him, which he He started talking about playing with Jimi Hendrix, but it really became a life sort of biography of him. And the stories that he told about meeting Jimi Hendrix, playing with Jimi Hendrix for the first time, living with Jimi Hendrix, they were essentially roommates for that summer, were really amazing stories. And I really, the story that he tells about practicing that Star Spangled Banner was really colorful and fascinating. He talks about Jimmy going up to the wall and hearing and feeling vibrations coming back at him off the wall. So that is a little insight into that iconic moment that is really fantastic. But
It was fantastic.
yeah, but Gerardo then goes on to talk about what happens after Woodstock and how he makes his own way and starts this sort of jazz fusion musical style. And I really thought that this story, this Puerto Rican born, New York raised musician who is multi-talented in so many different ways, was a great sort of capper on this story about Woodstock that was also pretty multidisciplinary in terms of the types of music that we're playing. It wasn't just rock and roll. The first night was mostly folk and acoustic performers, and the last day, Sunday into Monday, it was pretty eclectic in terms of who was playing. And so to have Gerardo Velez there as well was really a sort of fantastic sort of button on that story.
That it was a fantastic chapter, and really revealing, and background information that I don't think a lot of us know very much, especially the whole method of the practicing with Jimi Hendrix. I just thought that was just great. Well, is there anything else you'd like to tell our listeners about the book, or a takeaway that you'd like them to have from finding out about what they could learn from this great book?
Well, for me, I think really what came out for me, both at the event and I hope it comes out in the book, is this sense of community and, for lack of being, stereotypical, peace and love that these people felt for each other at the time, and they still feel for each other today. And we actually got a picture from Rona Elliott of several of them that got together recently. And, there was Chipmunk, there was Rona, and all these people that came together. And I think in some ways this event helped bring them together in a way they hadn't, not just physically, but I think that continued afterwards. So I think that as much as it might seem, just a little stereotypical to say, oh, it's all about peace and love. It was about peace and love. And yes, there were many problems along the way. It's not like it was easy, and it's not like it was, walk in the park, and there were problems and, they overcame them. But at the heart of it, that's what it was about.
For my takeaway, I want to put on my music nerd hat for just a second. And every time I talk about the book, I always have to point out the Saturday night performance. I just have to give you the lineup, because to me, this is just sort of a murderer's row of just awesome bands, one after the other. So I'm going to literally read from the text here. So this is Saturday night overnight. We go from the Grateful Dead to Creedence Clearwater Revival to Janis Joplin, Sly and the Family Stone, The Who, and then Jefferson Airplane is finishing up Sunday morning at about 9:45. And to me, that just is a perfect summary of Woodstock as a whole, right? All of those wonderful bands all in a row. And that's not even counting Jimi Hendrix, who's going to come on and knock the doors off for a far fewer amount of people Monday morning. So that's my little music nerd side note there.
It does make you realize, like, the who's who of the performers at that one event, and today all those names are so famous, and so many people, their careers went on Santana, and their careers were really launched at that event. Well, I really appreciate you talking to me about this book. It was very exciting to go through this and hear also more details about the event, and also about the making of this book. And I think that it's an easy read for anyone who wants to pick it up. it read very, very well, very easy to read, and it really is chock full of information that you can pick up a lot of information very easily. So highly recommend it. Thank you so much for talking at Books at Berkeley.
Thank you for inviting us.